Hey everyone, it's Scott Winter, and we're going to talk about PHP, what it means, and how to upgrade it. If you use a self-hosted WordPress site, you may have seen notices lately that your PHP version is out of date. Well, let's talk a little bit about what PHP is and how you maybe go about upgrading it to keep your website secure and up to date. Okay, so first of all, what is PHP? Well, PHP is a software language, and it's basically what your server uses to connect essentially the WordPress database or the MySQL database to like the front end, if you will, where the information gets turned into sort of CSS and HTML to run in the actual web browser like Google Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer. I'm not an expert at this. I'm actually kind of reaching a little bit out of my comfort zone, but at the end of the day, where PHP is like the software that runs your web server. So, and like any piece of software, it's software that needs to be updated at some point in time, right? So there are many different versions of PHP, and every year or so they come up with a new version. And for many years, WordPress worked on like a lower version, so it wasn't really a huge issue. But today, as we're getting more and more cool features into WordPress, like the new Gutenberg editor and just overall security and improvement enhancements to WordPress, they're now starting to require a sort of newer version of PHP. That's why this is becoming more of an issue, and maybe why you've heard about it recently, because WordPress, as well as many of the plugins and themes that you use on top of WordPress, are requiring higher versions of PHP. Now, normally this isn't a huge issue. If you run a virtual host, or you have more of a dedicated hosting account, then you probably would just go in there and upgrade to PHP using whoever provides that virtual server to you. Now, if you're using the shared hosting, the popular shared hosting accounts, like for example, where you pay maybe a smaller amount, maybe it's just a few, a couple dollars a month, maybe it's a Bluehost, GoDaddy, SiteGround. These type of shared hosting environments, HostGator is another one. These are where things get a little more tricky when it comes to upgrading your server's PHP. So first of all, you want to check to see what version you're on. You may already be on a compatible version of PHP, which if that's the case, then hoorah, right? If you're not, then you're going to have to sort of consider a few steps in order to get yourself to that level. And there may be a few reasons why you haven't upgraded your level of PHP as well, or why it hasn't been upgraded. Most likely, if you're on a shared hosting environment, then probably it's because there are tons of websites on this one cluster of hosting accounts, right? So it's not really easy for these shared environments just to bump everyone up to a newer version of PHP, because while your website might be compatible, other websites on the server may not be compatible, right? So that's one reason. The other reason is that just because WordPress core is PHP compatible to up to 7.3 point whatever, it doesn't mean your theme or other plugins that you use are compatible to that level of PHP. So it's kind of a slippery slope, right? And I know for me, it's like I have some websites that are compatible and ready to go, and I have some websites that are old and they haven't been updated, and they may not work with newer versions of PHP. So it's a kind of a headache, but we're getting through this, right? So right now, WordPress is asking that you have a PHP compatible server up to 7.2.1, right? This is a requirement of WordPress. Most likely, if you're using an older server, you might be like on PHP 5.6 or PHP 7.0 maybe. This is really where you have to kind of decide what you're going to do. First of all, there's a great plugin that lets you sort of see what version of PHP you're on. There's a couple ways of checking what version of PHP you have. This is actually a great plugin. It's called Display PHP version, and you can install this into your self-hosted WordPress site to simply check the current version of WordPress that you have, and it'll actually just put a little text warning saying running PHP version 7.1 point whatever, or whatever current version you're at. So just you can install this as you install any other plugin, and it will display the version that you have. It's just a really quick and simple way to check to see what version your server is currently running. Most likely, you'll have to contact your hosting provider and ask them what version you're on. Or sometimes if you log in, you might get like technical information regarding your server. Other plugins, like for example, bigger plugins or even themes, have like an environment compatibility check. So I know, for example, the Divi theme, as well as WooCommerce plugin, the big and really popular e-commerce plugin WooCommerce, have like a system report page where on that page it will actually tell you what version of PHP you're using. And it will say this is incompatible. So it's something to consider. Now, if you have an older site or you haven't updated your theme in a while, you probably don't really want to upgrade your PHP because then your theme might not work correctly, right? Or so it might be time really to not just look at upgrading your server, but look at upgrading your entire website. Unfortunately, that's kind of the world we live in right now. Otherwise, if you have like a newer theme, or you're using like a theme framework, like for example a Divi or a Studio Press or one of those where it's like you have a core theme that's pretty consistently updated, and you're probably okay. But more importantly, the next step is like, what do you do to upgrade your site? First of all, make sure that your plugins and themes are compatible with the current version of PHP or with a standard version of PHP. Ideally, it'd be great if your plugins and themes were compatible up to like PHP at least 7.2. If not, then you'll have to maybe look at upgrading into a new theme or stop using some of the plugins that are not compatible to those versions. If all that checks out, but your server hasn't been updated because of your hosting company, then you'll have to either look and see if there's a way that you can do it yourself in terms of going into your control panel for your hosting and upgrading to the current version that you want or a higher version. Or you can go and actually make a request to the hosting company, and they'll tell you if they can upgrade the PHP version for you. If they can't, they might say you either are going to have to move to a new server or you're going to have to just deal with it, right, and live with it at its current state, which it's not great because you do want to upgrade, because usually what happens is not only is it more secure, a little more secure of an environment, but it usually speeds things up quite a bit. I've noticed some significant speed increases with each version of PHP. So definitely something that you want to do, just because it'll save you headache and save you time, right? Which is super important. So, and then if you do have the option to do a self upgrade on your sites, be sure to just make sure you back everything up before you actually go and upgrade. Then when you upgrade, it kind of happens in the back end, like in the background. You don't really know what happens. It usually happens pretty quickly, but you might find a couple days later, you might find an error here or there. Then you'll know if something isn't quite working right. And that's happened to me. I've upgraded the PHP and then something just gets a little wonky on the website, so I just downgrade to a prior version. Luckily, I use siteground.com for my hosting, and they let me go in there and upgrade the PHP myself on a per website basis. So I can go into my account and say, yeah, I want PHP 7.3.6 on these particular websites, and I want PHP 5. Whatever on this website, right? Which is nice. It helps me sort of not have to do everything at once. Ideally, I'd like to get everything upgraded to a current version of PHP, especially since WordPress is now going to require a higher version of PHP. But sometimes it's not in the cards. I don't have the time or the resources to necessarily upgrade those websites at that particular time. So I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how I upgrade my PHP on SiteGround, just so you have an understanding of how it can be done. This may not translate to your hosting company. You may want to either consider moving your websites to SiteGround, or at the same time, you may want to reach out to your hosting company's help center, or submit a ticket and ask them, can you upgrade my PHP, and if so, how? Right? So that would be the alternative solution. So let's jump into the tutorial right now. All right, everyone, I told you I was going to give you just a really quick tutorial about how I would upgrade my PHP on SiteGround. Of course, this may or may not translate to your hosting company, but if you do use SiteGround, here's a one way of doing it, right? So first of all, I logged into my account dashboard, if you will, and then I need to go to my control panel. And then once I log into my control panel, I'll get all the options for my server, and then basically you want to scroll down to the one that says PHP Version Manager. And when I click on PHP Version Manager, it gives me a whole litany of all my websites, right? And then I can click on one of the websites. So for example, I'll click on this one. And then in here I can see what version of PHP is currently running for this particular web domain or website. So it goes down from 5.6.4, which is pretty old at this point, and then up into the 7s, like PHP 7.0, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and so on. I can turn on manage PHP versioning, meaning that basically whatever is the default SiteGround version, which is currently PHP 7.1, is what I can use it'll just keep it always up to date to that. Or I can go ahead and pick a version that I want. Okay, so according to WordPress, and this is June of 2019, WordPress requires version 7.3 or greater. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this one up from 7.1 to 7.3. And then once I do that, I hit click save. And then it says, great, it's updated. And then I'll go to my website and just check to make sure everything works out fine. I know it will. That site's actually in development, so I don't want to show it to you at this point. But that being said, that's all it takes. It's really kind of seamless in the back end. It does everything for you. You just have to make sure you go back and test to make sure everything is okay and not wonky and working for you. Okay, so that was just a really quick tutorial. It's pretty seamless. Just make sure you back up your stuff before you do it. You never know. There could be a bigger issue that causes a huge problem. I haven't noticed that ever upgrading my PHP versions, but you just never know. I want to make sure you're safe. Luckily, with like a company like SiteGround, is that I have like a 30-day rolling backup, so no matter what, I could always just roll my server back to yesterday, and it'd be great. So I pay a little bit for that, but it's totally worth it. It saves me lots of headache, time, and hours that I have invested in all my web properties, which to me is the front of my business. So super important and a great investment for anyone looking to really scale their web efforts. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to make sure you hit me up. You can find me at my free Facebook group called WordMentor.com. If you go to that domain, it will redirect you to my Facebook group where you can join. Otherwise, be sure to check out all the other great resources I have on my different channels. That's it for now. Thanks.